They were already standing there when the gate opened. Close enough for cameras. Close enough to look rehearsed. Someone had brought flowers that wilted slightly at the edges, like they'd been waiting longer than planned. Smiles were arranged carefully, the way people do when they don't know what expression will be required yet. I stepped into the sunlight and felt nothing rush in to meet it. No relief. No anger. Just the awareness that they were positioned where they wanted to be seen. A voice called my name. Soft. Familiar in a way that felt outdated, like a ringtone from a phone I no longer owned. Hands lifted, ready for contact. For proof that whatever had happened inside those walls had not altered the shape of us. I kept walking. The pause behind me was brief but noticeable. Long enough for uncertainty to register. Long enough for someone to lower their arms. A car waited farther down the road, engine running. I slid into the back seat and closed the door before anyone could follow. The glass dimmed the scene instantly, turning faces into reflections, gestures into vague movement. As we pulled away, I didn't watch them recede. I watched the road ahead, already narrowing into something manageable. People assume release is a return. That you step back into the version of life that existed before everything went wrong. But nothing had gone wrong suddenly. It had been arranged. Decided. Spoken aloud without me. The story about what happened had traveled faster than I ever could. By the time I was allowed to respond, it had already settled into something convincing. Inside, time had slowed enough to notice patterns. Which questions were never asked? Which decisions happened in rooms I wasn't in? Which signatures appeared when I had no access to my own name? I learned where certainty comes from. Not truth. Repetition. By the time the system finished with me, I understood something else too. Outcomes don't need to feel fair to become permanent. They only need enough agreement. The car merged into traffic. The city looked unchanged. Efficient. Indifferent. Somewhere behind us, a version of events still stood intact, waiting to be believed. Somewhere ahead, processes were already in motion that would strain it. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel broken. I felt precise. And that was enough to begin. The morning I left the apartment, I didn't take my coat. It was still hanging by the door when they came for me hours later. Still damp from the night air that leaked through the cracked window I'd been meaning to fix for weeks. Small things like that used to bother me. By the time I remembered the code existed, it had already been catalogued as evidence of something. The accusation arrived without preamble. No warning call. No chance to prepare a response. It simply appeared, fully formed, attached to my name like it had been there all along. At first, I treated it like a clerical error. The kind of thing that dissolves under basic scrutiny. I explained this to the officer who asked me to come downtown. I used reasonable tones. I stayed calm. That lasted until I saw who else was already there. My husband sat in a room with glass walls, visible but separated. Next to him, my closest friend from work. Across from them, my sister-in-law. All three speaking to different people, but their posture matched. Synchronized in a way that didn't happen naturally. No one had called me. The detective assigned to my case had kind eyes and a voice that suggested we were on the same team. She asked me to walk her through the timeline. I did. She nodded at appropriate moments, wrote things down that I couldn't see. Then she asked me to explain why three separate people had described the same events differently. I opened my mouth. Closed it. Started again. What events? She slid a folder across the table. I didn't open it immediately. I watched her face instead, looking for some signal about what I was supposed to find inside. Her expression didn't change. The pages inside contained statements, dates, locations, descriptions of conversations I didn't remember having, actions I didn't recognize as mine. The language was specific, detailed, consistent across all three accounts. This didn't happen, I said. She waited. None of this happened. They seem very certain. I looked past her, through the glass, toward the room where my husband still sat. He wasn't looking in my direction. He was focused on whoever was interviewing him, answering questions with the same measured calm he used when explaining technical problems to clients. I need to speak with them, I said. That's not possible right now. Why not? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she asked if I wanted a lawyer. The question arrived too casually, like an afterthought. That's when I understood the conversation had already moved past clarification. I said yes. The lawyer who showed up 3 hours later looked tired before she even sat down. She read through the statements quickly, her pen tapping against the folder's edge. "This is coordinated," she said finally. "I know. Do you know why?" I didn't. That was the part that kept circling back, demanding attention. I searched for reasons. Recent arguments. Financial pressure. Secrets I might have stumbled into without realizing. Nothing surfaced. "They're not asking for your side," the lawyer continued. "They're asking you to respond to theirs." So I respond. "With what?" "Your word against 3 aligned testimonies." She closed the folder. "Right now, you're defending against a story that's already been told. And it sounds believable." The hearing happened faster than I expected. Dates compressed. Procedures accelerated. By the time I stood in front of the judge, the narrative had calcified into something unshakable. My husband testified first. He didn't look at me. He addressed the room like he was presenting quarterly projections. His voice never wavered. The details he offered weren't dramatic. They were mundane, specific. The kind of small observations that sound true because no one bothers to invent them. My friend went next. She cried briefly, then steadied herself. Apologized for the emotion. Her account matched his. Not word for word. That would have seemed rehearsed. But the structure aligned. The timeline held. My sister-in-law spoke last. She was the most reluctant. Her discomfort seemed genuine. That made her the most convincing. I watched the judge's face as she listened. Watched the shift from skepticism to consideration to something that looked like resignation. When my lawyer stood to present my defense, the air in the room had already changed. We had character witnesses. Documentation of my work. Records that contradicted parts of their timeline. But none of it addressed the central claim directly. We were fighting around the edges of a story that had already occupied the center. The ruling came 2 weeks later. I was standing when they read it. My lawyer had advised me to sit, but I needed to be upright when the words landed. The judge used careful language. Acknowledged the complexity. Noted the seriousness. Then delivered the sentence without hesitation. I didn't cry. I noticed instead how the tension in the room released, like pressure escaping from a sealed container. People shifted in their seats. Someone exhaled audibly. Behind me, I heard my husband's voice, low and steady, speaking to someone I couldn't see. I turned to look at him then. Finally. He met my eyes for less than a second before looking away. The transport van had no windows in the back. I sat on a metal bench bolted to the floor, hands secured in front of me, listening to the engine's rhythm change as we moved through traffic. Someone else sat across from me. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound rehearsed. Processing took hours. Forms. Photographs. Instructions delivered in sequences I couldn't retain. People spoke to me using my last name only, like my first name had been revoked along with everything else. I was assigned a cell. A number. A schedule that divided time into blocks too small to feel like actual time. The first night, I didn't sleep. I replayed the hearing. Searched for the moment when the story stopped being mine. It wasn't a single instant. It was cumulative. A slow transfer of ownership that happened while I was still trying to defend the original version. By morning, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit during the trial. The story didn't need to be true. It only needed to be first. Mail arrived sporadically. Letters from people who called themselves supporters but couldn't specify what they were supporting. Apologies from acquaintances who believed something had happened but weren't sure what. Advice from strangers about maintaining faith. Nothing useful. My lawyer wrote once a month. Updates about appeals. Procedural options. Timelines that kept extending. Her tone remained professional, but the subtext was clear. We were managing expectations now, not mounting challenges. 3 months in, my mother visited. She sat across from me in a room designed to prevent privacy, hands folded on the table between us. She looked smaller than I remembered. Older in a way that had nothing to do with time. Your father wanted to come, she said. I waited. He wasn't sure you'd want to see him. Why wouldn't I? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she asked how I was managing. If I needed anything. If the conditions were acceptable. Acceptable. The word sat wrong. What are people saying? I asked. Her hands tightened slightly. Does it matter? Yes. She looked past me, toward the guard station near the door. They're saying different things. Some people don't believe it. Some people think there's more to it than what came out in court. And some people think it's true. She didn't deny it. What does he say? I asked. My husband. He doesn't say much. She paused, searching for the right word. Quiet. He was always quiet. Not like this. I wanted to ask what she meant. What specifically had changed in his behavior? Whether he seemed relieved or burdened or something else entirely. But the question felt too large for the time we had left. The house? I asked instead. He's still there. Your sister-in-law moved in temporarily. To help with things. The information landed without surprise. Of course she had. The arrangement made sense. Practical. Supportive. Coordinated. My mother left 20 minutes later. She promised to visit again soon. The promise sounded sincere and hollow at the same time. I returned to my cell and lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere outside these walls, my life was continuing without me. Bills were being paid. Decisions were being made. My absence had created a vacuum that was being filled efficiently. No one had to pretend I was coming back. A month later, a letter arrived from my husband. The handwriting was his. Neat. Controlled. The kind of penmanship that made grocery lists look formal. He asked how I was. Mentioned that certain administrative matters needed attention. Included documents that required my signature for things I no longer had access to or control over. The tone was careful. Neutral. Like he was writing to a business associate he hadn't spoken to in years. There was no mention of the trial. No reference to what he'd said under oath. No acknowledgement that his testimony had placed me here. At the bottom, before his signature, he wrote, "I hope you understand this is for the best." I read the sentence 5 times. Tried to locate what this referred to. The administrative matters. The separation. The conviction. All of it. I didn't sign the documents. I didn't respond. In the rec yard, I watched how alliances formed. Who spoke to whom? Which conflicts emerged and which ones dissolved without intervention. There were rules here that no one explained directly. You learn them by observing consequences. Some people talked constantly. Filled every silence with explanations of why they didn't belong here. Why their case was different. Why the system had failed them specifically. Others stayed quiet. Moved through routines without commentary. I became the second type. 6 months in, someone asked me what I was in for. I told her. She nodded slowly, like she was deciding whether to believe me. Then she asked the question everyone eventually asked, "Did you do it?" "No." That's what everyone says. I know. She studied my face for a moment longer. Difference is, most people sound like they're trying to convince you. You sound like you've already stopped trying. She walked away before I could respond. That night, I thought about what she'd said. About when exactly I had stopped defending myself. Not during the trial. Not even after the sentencing. It was earlier. In that first interrogation room, when I realized no one was asking if the story was true. They were asking if I could disprove it. And the answer, no matter how I shaped it, was no. The appeal hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday. My lawyer arrived early, carrying files that looked thicker than they had 6 months ago. She'd found inconsistencies. Small ones. Timing discrepancies that didn't quite add up. A receipt that placed my friend somewhere other than where she claimed to be on a specific afternoon. It's not much, she admitted. But it's something. I nodded. Watched her organize the documents across the table between us. She worked methodically, building a structure out of fragments. They'll have to explain these, she said, tapping one of the papers. On record. The hearing room was smaller than the courtroom had been. Fewer people. Less ceremony. My husband sat 3 rows back, flanked by his lawyer. My friend was there too, positioned near the door like she might need to leave quickly. My sister-in-law was absent. The judge reviewed the materials without expression, asked preliminary questions, established the scope of what we were contesting. Then my lawyer presented the discrepancy about the receipt. My friend was called to address it. She approached the stand calmly, settled into the chair without hesitation. When asked about the date in question, she didn't fumble. She clarified immediately. "I misspoke during the original testimony," she said. "It was the day before, not that day. I was confused about which conversation happened when." The judge asked if she was certain. "Yes. I reviewed my own records after the trial. I should have corrected it sooner." The explanation was clean, apologetic without being defensive. It accounted for the error while maintaining the substance of her original claim. My lawyer pushed back, asked why the correction hadn't been submitted formally, why it only emerged now during appeal. "I didn't realize it mattered," my friend said. "The timeline I gave was off by 1 day, but the events themselves still happened." She looked directly at me then, not with hostility, with something that resembled regret. "I'm sorry for the confusion," she said, "but what I testified to is true." My husband was called next. He moved to the stand without looking in my direction, answered questions about his own timeline. When confronted with a contradiction, a meeting he claimed to have attended that had been rescheduled, he responded immediately. "I attended the rescheduled session," he said. "I should have been clearer about which meeting I meant. The content of both was similar, so I conflated them." Again, the explanation held. It acknowledged the error while preserving the narrative. My lawyer tried a different approach. Asked about financial records. Questioned why certain accounts had been accessed during the period I was being investigated. "Emergency expenses," my husband said. "Legal consultations." I was trying to understand what was happening. "Without consulting your wife?" She was already in custody. I didn't want to burden her with financial stress. "So you made decisions about jointly held assets without her input?" "I made decisions I thought were necessary to protect both of us." The phrasing was careful, self-sacrificing. It positioned him as someone managing crisis, not exploiting it. The judge asked follow-up questions, pressed on a few details, but the responses came quickly, confidently. During the break, my lawyer pulled me aside. "They prepared for this," she said quietly. "I know. Every inconsistency we found, they have an answer for. It's not just deflection. They've built around it." I watched through the window as my husband and my friend spoke in the hallway. Their conversation looked casual, brief, but I recognized the body language, the same coordinated distance they'd maintained throughout the original trial. When we reconvened, the judge addressed the room. "The discrepancies presented do not constitute grounds for overturning the original verdict," she said. "Minor errors in testimony, when clarified and contextualized, do not invalidate the substance of the claims made." My lawyer started to object. The judge raised a hand. "The consistency across multiple testimonies, even with minor timeline adjustments, suggests a coherent account of events. The burden remains on the appellant to provide affirmative evidence of innocence, not simply to highlight imperfections in the prosecution's case." The gavel came down before I fully processed what had been said. Outside, my lawyer stood with me on the courthouse steps. People moved past us. Traffic hummed in the background. "I'm sorry," she said. "You told me it wasn't much. I thought it might be enough to create doubt. Doubt doesn't matter if they're certain." She shifted her briefcase to her other hand. "There are other avenues. We can." "They've thought through every question we could ask," I said. "They're not scrambling. They're not contradicting each other under pressure. They're adjusting." "Then what do you want to do?" I looked back at the courthouse. My husband was descending the opposite staircase, phone already to his ear. My friend had disappeared. "I want to go back," I said. My lawyer looked confused. "Back where?" "Inside. I want to finish the sentence." "You don't have to give up. We can keep." "I'm not giving up." She studied my face. "Then what are you doing?" I didn't answer. The transport was already waiting. On the ride back, I replayed the hearing. Not the rulings. The responses. The way each answer had arrived preformed. The way no one hesitated when challenged. They had prepared, which meant they knew the story had weak points, which meant they had identified them before I did. And if they had identified them, they had also reinforced them. Patched the gaps. Made sure the structure could withstand scrutiny. But reinforcements leave marks. New materials don't quite match old ones. The patches show if you know where to look. I leaned my head against the van's wall and closed my eyes. I had time now. More than they expected me to have. Time to stop defending. Time to start paying attention. The first year collapsed into itself. Days didn't feel distinct. They stacked identically, one on top of another, until the pile became its own marker of duration. Breakfast at 6. Work detail at 7. Rec yard at noon. Dinner at 5. Lights out at 9. The routine didn't comfort. It erased. I stopped expecting letters. When they arrived, I read them once and discarded them. Most contained the same structure: concern, encouragement, updates about lives continuing normally elsewhere. No one knew what to say, so they said everything except what mattered. My mother visited twice more. The conversations grew shorter. She ran out of neutral topics. I ran out of patience for them. "You seem different," she said during the third visit. "How?" She hesitated. Distant. I didn't correct her. My lawyer's updates slowed. Monthly became quarterly. The language shifted from active pursuit to passive monitoring. We were waiting now. For what, neither of us specified. Inside, I learned the architecture of the place. Not just the physical layout, but the systems underneath. Who processed requests? Which guards enforced rules strictly, and which ones allowed flexibility? When shifts changed. Where oversights happened. I didn't do this deliberately at first. It accumulated. Observation replacing engagement. Other inmates still asked questions. Tried to place me within familiar categories. Political prisoner. Victim of circumstance. Someone who'd been framed. I offered nothing that confirmed or denied. "You never talk about your case," one woman said. She'd been assigned the bunk below mine for 3 months. Her name was Sierra. She was in for fraud. She talked about it constantly. No, I agreed. Why not? What would I say? That you didn't do it. That they lied. That you're fighting it. I folded the sheet I'd been straightening. And then what? Then people know. People already know what they think they know. She watched me for a moment. "You're one of those." "One of what?" "People who've stopped arguing." I didn't respond. She climbed onto her bunk. That's either really smart or really sad. I can't tell which. Time moved differently in the second year. Not faster. Not slower. It bent. Stretched in unexpected places. Compressed in others. I noticed patterns I hadn't seen before. How certain decisions got made. Which paperwork moved quickly and which sat untouched for weeks. The gap between official procedure and actual practice. I started asking questions. Not dramatic ones. Small clarifications. Administrative details. The kind of inquiries that sounded like someone trying to understand the system, not challenge it. A guard named Morrison answered most of them. She'd been working here for 12 years. She knew which rules were absolute and which ones were negotiable. "You planning something?" she asked one afternoon. We were standing in the hallway outside the library. I just asked about the appeals process for commissary denials. "No," I said. "People don't usually care about procedural minutiae unless they're building toward something." "I'm not building. I'm learning." She considered this. Learning what? How things actually work. Morrison smiled slightly. Most people don't want to know that. They prefer thinking the system makes sense. Does it? Sometimes. When it's convenient. She walked away before I could ask what she meant. But I already understood. The system worked when all the pieces aligned. When documentation matched testimony. When timelines held together. When no one asked questions that required uncomfortable answers. It failed in the gaps. The places where discretion replaced rules. Where someone had to make a choice without clear guidance. Those were the weak points. I started keeping notes. Not on paper. That would have been noticed. I memorized instead. Dates. Names. Sequences. The kind of information that seemed irrelevant until you needed it. Sierra noticed the change. "You're doing that thing again," she said one night. "What thing?" "That thing where you're here but not here. Like you're calculating something." I didn't deny it. You figure out how to beat your case? No. Then what are you doing? I looked at the ceiling. Water stains marked where pipes had leaked years ago. No one had bothered to paint over them. I'm waiting, I said. For what? For them to make a mistake. The people who put you here? Yes. Sierra was quiet for a while. Then, what if they don't? Everyone makes mistakes eventually. Especially people who think they've already won. She laughed quietly. That's some long game thinking. It's the only kind I have left. Midway through the second year, something shifted. Not externally. Nothing changed in my circumstances. The routine remained identical. The appeals went nowhere. But internally, something released. The anger I'd carried, tight and hot and constant, burned out. Not gradually. All at once. Like a candle reaching the end of its wick. What replaced it was colder. Clearer. I stopped thinking about fairness. Stopped waiting for the truth to assert itself. Stopped believing that eventually, someone would notice the inconsistencies and correct them. Truth didn't win by existing. It won by being positioned correctly. Timed right. Delivered through the proper channels. And if no one was going to do that for me, I would have to learn how to do it myself. Morrison noticed the change too. You look different, she said one morning during breakfast supervision. How? Calmer. I nodded. I am. Most people get more agitated the longer they're here. You went the opposite direction. Maybe I adjusted. No. She shook her head. Adjustment looks different. This looks like acceptance. Is there a difference? Yeah. Acceptance means you've given up. You haven't given up. She moved on to check another table. But she was right. I hadn't given up. I just stopped performing the emotional labor of protest. The story that put me here was built carefully. Deliberately. By people who understood how credibility worked. I didn't need to dismantle it loudly. I needed to outlast it quietly. And I had nothing but time. The library was poorly stocked. Donated books, mostly. Romance novels with cracked spines. Thrillers missing their final chapters. A handful of outdated textbooks that no school wanted anymore. But there was a legal section. 3 shelves. Half the books were irrelevant to my situation. The other half taught me things my lawyer had never mentioned. I started spending my free time there. The librarian was an inmate named Paz. She'd been here for 6 years. Embezzlement. She'd worked in finance before, handled accounts for small businesses. She knew how systems broke down when no one was watching carefully. You reading all of these? She asked one afternoon, nodding at the stack I'd accumulated. Trying to. Most people check out 1 book. You've got 8. I'm a slow reader. She smiled. No, you're not. You're looking for something specific. I didn't confirm or deny. Procedural law, she said, reading the spines. Appeals. Evidence admissibility. You planning another run at your case? Just educating myself. Uh-huh. She leaned against the desk. Advice? Don't rely on what's in those books. Half of it's outdated. The other half assumes the system works the way it's supposed to. And it doesn't? It works the way people make it work. Which means it's inconsistent. I set the books down. So, what should I rely on? Documentation. Timestamps. Things that can't be argued away with explanations. She paused. And patience. The system moves slow. People forget that works both ways. I checked out 3 books. That night, I read about procedural errors. How cases could be revisited not because new evidence emerged, but because the original process had flaws. Missing notifications. Improperly filed motions. Deadlines that weren't met. Technical failures. The kind of thing that didn't prove innocence but created openings. I made mental notes. Started tracking timelines for my own case. Dates when I was supposed to have been notified. When documents were filed. When decisions were made. Some of the dates didn't align with what I remembered. Small gaps. A day here. 2 days there. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they suggested haste. Morrison found me in the yard a week later. You've been asking the paralegal about case files, she said. I looked up from the bench where I'd been sitting. Is that not allowed? It's allowed. Just unusual. Most people ask once, get told the files are in storage, then give up. I didn't give up. I noticed. You filed a request for your complete case record. including sealed materials. Am I not entitled to that? You are. It's just, most people don't know to ask for the sealed materials specifically. I waited. Morrison sat down beside me. What are you looking for? Anything that was filed in my case that I didn't see during trial. Why would there be anything like that? I don't know. That's why I'm looking. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you think they hid something. I think things move fast during prosecution. Corners get cut. Forms get filed incorrectly. Maybe something was supposed to be disclosed and wasn't. And if there's nothing, then I wasted some time. I have plenty of that. Morrison stood. Request will take 6 to 8 weeks to process. Maybe longer. I'll wait. She walked a few steps, then stopped. For what it's worth. I've seen a lot of people come through here. Most of them are guilty. Some aren't. She looked back at me. You don't carry yourself like the guilty ones. How do the guilty ones carry themselves? They explain too much. Or they shut down completely. You're doing something different. What's that? Preparing. She left before I could respond. The request took 9 weeks. When it finally arrived, it came in 3 boxes. Transcripts. Filed motions. Evidence logs. Correspondence between lawyers and the court. I went through everything methodically. Read each document twice. Made notes I kept only in my head. Most of it matched what I'd seen during trial. The statements. The testimonies. The evidence presented. But there were other things too. A motion my lawyer had filed requesting additional time to review evidence. It had been denied. I didn't remember her mentioning that. A witness list that included names I didn't recognize. People who'd been deposed but never called to testify. And buried in the middle of the second box, a police report from the initial investigation. Filed 2 days after I'd been taken in for questioning. The report summarized the accusations. Noted the coordination between witnesses. Then, at the bottom, a single line from the investigating officer. Recommend independent verification of financial access logs before proceeding to charges. The recommendation had been crossed out. Initialed by someone else. Overridden. I read the line 5 times. Someone had suggested verifying the evidence before charging me. That verification never happened. The case had proceeded anyway. I set the report aside and continued through the rest of the boxes. Found nothing else that directly contradicted the trial narrative. But the absence of that verification sat differently now. Not proof of anything, but a question that hadn't been answered. Paz found me in the library later that week. You look like you found something, she said. Maybe. Good something or bad something? Incomplete something. She nodded. Those are the most useful kind. Complete evidence just confirms what everyone already thinks. Incomplete evidence creates obligation. Someone has to finish it. Who? Whoever's job it was to complete it in the first place. I thought about the crossed-out recommendation. The initials I didn't recognize. What if they don't want to finish it? I asked. Then you make it more uncomfortable to leave it incomplete than to address it. How? Depends. Sometimes you just have to ask the right question at the right time. She picked up one of the books I'd been reading. And sometimes you have to wait until asking that question causes problems for someone other than you. I left the library and returned to my cell. Sierra was already there, reading a magazine someone had passed along. You figure it out yet? She asked without looking up. Figure what out? Whatever you've been working on for the past 3 months. I found a thread. Can you pull it? Not yet. Why not? I lay down on my bunk. Stared at the familiar water stains on the ceiling. Because pulling it now just tells them where to reinforce. I need to wait until they've forgotten where the weak points are. Sierra flipped a page. That's some cold patience. It's the only kind that works. The news reached me third hand. Sierra heard it from someone in the kitchen who'd heard it from a guard who'd been talking too loudly near the phones. By the time the information filtered down to our cell, it had been stripped of context, but retained its essential shape. Something had happened. Something public. Something involving my husband. Apparently there was some kind of event, Sierra said. Official thing. It didn't go the way it was supposed to. What kind of event? I don't know. Business? Charity? Someone said there were cameras. I didn't respond immediately. Tried to imagine what kind of public appearance would warrant attention. My husband had never sought visibility. He preferred operating in rooms where decisions were made quietly. Why would that reach us here? I asked. Sierra shrugged. Because someone thought you'd want to know. Or because it was weird enough that people are talking about it. I filed the information away. Waited. 3 days later, my lawyer called. The call itself was unusual. She typically communicated through letters. Voice calls suggested urgency or complication. Have you been following the news? She asked. I don't have access to news. Right. Of course. She paused. I heard papers shuffling. There was an incident at a fundraising gala. Your husband was being honored for his work with a non-profit organization. Community Development Initiative. Honored for what? Donations. Volunteer coordination. The organization released a statement last year crediting him with significant contributions. I waited. During the ceremony, when they tried to process the award payment, there's a grant component. Apparently, the transaction flagged. Multiple accounts showed authorization issues. Nothing catastrophic, but it created a delay. In front of donors. In front of press. What kind of authorization issues? That's not entirely clear. The organization's director gave a vague statement about technical difficulties. Banking protocols. But people noticed. And when people notice these things, they start asking questions. What questions? About financial oversight. About whether proper documentation exists for the contributions he's being credited for. About why accounts that should be straightforward are encountering friction. I pressed the phone closer. Is someone investigating? Not formally. Not yet. But the optics are uncomfortable. Particularly given. She trailed off. Given my conviction. Yes. I thought about the financial records that had been accessed while I was in custody. The decisions my husband had made without my input. The accounts he described as necessary emergency measures. What happens now? I asked. Probably nothing. These things usually resolve quietly. But it's creating conversation. And conversation creates scrutiny. From who? Journalists. Initially. But if there's substance behind the questions, potentially regulatory bodies. Nonprofits have reporting requirements. If documentation doesn't support claimed contributions. She left the implication hanging. After the call ended, I sat in the empty phone bay for several minutes. A guard eventually told me my time was up. I returned to my cell and tried to reconstruct what I knew. My husband had positioned himself publicly. Accepted recognition. Done so in a context that required financial verification. And the verification had failed. Not dramatically. Not in a way that proved wrongdoing. Just enough to create pause. Hesitation. The kind of small fracture that raised questions about what else might not align. Sierra was waiting when I got back. Good news or bad news? She asked. Unclear. Your face says good. I sat on my bunk. Something didn't work the way it was supposed to. For them or for you? For them. She grinned. About time. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from someone I didn't know. The return address listed a local news outlet. The letter was brief. Professional. It explained that the writer was researching nonprofit financial practices and had come across discrepancies in documentation related to the organization that had honored my husband. The writer wanted to know if I'd be willing to discuss my own financial history, particularly regarding jointly held accounts and their management during my incarceration. I read the letter twice, then folded it and placed it under my mattress. I didn't respond. Not yet. Morrison found me in the yard the next day. You got mail from a reporter, she said. You read my mail? It screened. I didn't read it personally, but it gets flagged when media reaches out to inmates. Is that a problem? Depends on what you do with it. If you talk to press, it can complicate things. Create narratives you can't control. I nodded. I'm not talking to them. Smart. She started to walk away, then stopped. Though if you were going to talk to them, now would be the time. When they're already asking questions. When other people are paying attention. I thought you said it would complicate things. It would. But complications go both ways. Creates problems for you, sure. But also creates problems for anyone who'd prefer things stay quiet. She left me alone with that. I thought about the journalist's letter. About the questions being asked publicly. About the small fracture in the smooth surface my husband had maintained. Pause had said it. Incomplete evidence creates obligation. Someone had to finish it. But forcing that process too early could give them time to reinforce, to prepare better answers, to patch the gaps before they widened. I needed the fracture to spread on its own first. Needed the questions to multiply without my involvement. Needed them to scramble before they understood what they were scrambling toward. A week later, Sierra showed me an article someone had smuggled in, printed from online, already several days old. The headline read, "Local nonprofit faces questions over donor recognition practices." The article was measured, careful. It didn't accuse anyone of wrongdoing. It simply noted that several donations attributed to prominent donors couldn't be verified through standard documentation, that the organization's accounting practices were less robust than peer institutions, that leadership had been reluctant to provide clarification. My husband's name appeared twice, once in connection with the gala, once in a list of donors whose contributions were under review. "They're circling," Sierra said. "Not close enough yet." "How close do they need to get?" I handed the article back. "Close enough that staying quiet becomes more suspicious than answering." "And then what?" "Then they answer. And their answers won't match each other as well as they did the first time. Because they're not prepared. Because they prepared for the wrong questions." Sierra folded the article carefully. "You really have been thinking about this for a long time. Since the appeal hearing. Since I watched them adjust their testimonies to account for discrepancies. They were good at it then. They'll try to be good at it now. But the context is different. During the trial, they were defending me. United front. Now they're defending themselves. That changes the incentives." Morrison walked past, noticed our conversation, didn't interrupt. In the distance, someone called for count. We stood and filed into line. As we waited, I thought about the crossed-out recommendation in the police report. The verification that never happened. The questions that had been deferred in favor of proceeding quickly. The system had moved fast because everyone agreed on the direction. Now it would move slowly because people were no longer certain. And slow movement left time for fractures to widen. The second article appeared a month later. This one wasn't careful. Sierra didn't bring it to me directly. She left it on my bunk, folded so the headline faced up. "Donor under scrutiny in wife's fraud conviction." I picked it up slowly. Read standing. The article had more detail than the first. It referenced the original trial, summarized the accusations against me, then pivoted to questions about financial activity during the period I'd been incarcerated. Specific transactions were mentioned. Transfers between accounts. Liquidation of assets that required dual authorization, but had proceeded with only one signature. My signature. Forged or obtained under circumstances the article didn't specify. The nonprofit's director had issued a statement distancing the organization from the controversy. Noted that donor vetting processes were being reviewed. Suggested that any irregularities were the responsibility of individual contributors, not institutional oversight. My husband had declined to comment. My friend, the one who'd testified against me, had also been contacted. She'd provided a brief statement expressing surprise and concern. Said she hoped any misunderstandings could be resolved quickly. The article ended by noting that my sister-in-law, who had also testified at trial, could not be reached for comment. I read it 3 times, then folded it and slid it back under my mattress with the journalist's letter. Sierra was watching from her bunk. "They're eating each other," she said. "Not yet. That director threw your husband directly under the bus. And your friend is already hedging. They're creating distance. That's not the same as turning on each other." Looks the same to me. Distance can be strategic, coordinated. They protect themselves while maintaining the core story. Turning on each other means contradicting the narrative they all agreed on. Sierra sat up. So what makes them do that? Pressure that makes protecting themselves more important than protecting the group. And how do you create that pressure? I didn't answer immediately. The truth was I wasn't creating it. I was just watching it build. The journalist was doing the work. The nonprofit's need for credibility was doing the work. The public nature of the scrutiny was doing the work. I was just waiting for the right moment to add weight to something already fracturing. My lawyer called again 2 days later. Things are developing faster than I expected, she said. I saw the article. There's more. The nonprofit filed an amended tax return. Corrected several donation amounts. Your husband's contributions were reduced significantly. They're claiming administrative errors in the original filings. Convenient timing. Very. But it also creates a paper trail. Before, the claims about his donations were just public statements. Now there's official documentation showing discrepancies, which means regulatory bodies can request explanations. Have they? Not yet. But the organization is conducting an internal audit, and they've retained outside counsel. I process this. Who's conducting the audit? A firm out of the city. Reputable. They don't release findings unless there's something worth reporting. How long will it take? 3 to 6 months. Maybe longer if they find complications. And in the meantime? In the meantime, everyone involved is being asked questions. Informally for now, but questions nonetheless. After we hung up, I sat in the phone bay again. Tried to imagine the conversations happening outside. My husband explaining discrepancies. My friend being asked to clarify her relationship to the finances. My sister-in-law, absent from the second article, deciding whether to stay silent or speak. The unity they'd maintained during trial had been possible because they were all moving in the same direction. Toward a single goal. My conviction. Now they were moving in different directions. Toward self-preservation. And self-preservation didn't require coordination. It required distance. Morrison found me in the library a week later. You had another visitor request, she said. From who? Your sister-in-law. I looked up from the book I'd been pretending to read. She wants to visit? She wants to. Whether she's approved is a different question. Given her involvement in your case, it creates complications. What kind of complications? The kind where we have to ask why she's reaching out now. After 2 years of silence. Right when her name is appearing in news articles. I set the book down. Are you asking me why? I'm asking if you want the visit approved. I considered this. My sister-in-law had been the most reluctant witness during trial. Her testimony had been brief, uncomfortable, but she'd delivered it. She'd aligned with the others when it mattered. Now she wanted to talk, which meant something had shifted for her specifically. Approve it, I said. Morrison nodded. Might take a few weeks to process. I'll let you know. The visit was scheduled for a Thursday. I waited in the visitor's room, watching other inmates reunite with family members. The embraces looked mechanical, performative. Everyone knew they were being watched. My sister-in-law arrived 10 minutes late. She looked thinner than I remembered. Her clothes hung differently. She'd cut her hair short, which changed the shape of her face. We sat across from each other. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, she said, "Thank you for seeing me." I waited. I know you didn't have to. What do you want? She flinched slightly at the directness. I wanted to explain. Explain what? Why I testified the way I did. You testified because you believed what they told you to believe. No. I testified because I was scared. I leaned back slightly. Of what? Of him. Of what would happen if I didn't cooperate. She looked down at her hands. He said if I didn't support the story, I'd be implicated too. That the investigation would expand. That I'd lose everything. So you chose to let me lose everything instead. Yes. Her voice was quiet. I did. I didn't respond. She continued. But I didn't know it would work. I thought someone would notice. That the inconsistencies would matter. That you'd be able to defend yourself. I tried. You all had better answers. Because we practiced them. Over and over. He made sure we knew exactly what to say. How to adjust if questions changed. I know. I watched you do it during the appeal. She looked up. You noticed. Of course I noticed. Then you know it wasn't just testimony. It was performance. And I'm not. She paused. I'm not good at performing anymore. Is that why you're here? Because you can't keep up the act. I'm here because things are falling apart and I don't want to be the only one still pretending they're not. I studied her face. The tension there. The exhaustion. What's falling apart specifically? I asked. Everything. The nonprofit is asking questions he can't answer cleanly. Your friend is distancing herself. saying she was just reporting what she observed, that she didn't understand the financial implications. And you? I'm being asked to verify transactions I never actually witnessed. To confirm details I only know because he told me about them. She leaned forward. I can't do it anymore. I can't keep saying I'm certain about things I'm not certain about. Then don't. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. Tell the truth. Say you lied. Correct the record. She shook her head. If I do that, I implicate myself. Perjury. Conspiracy. I could end up exactly where you are. Then why are you here? She was quiet for a long moment. Because I need you to know I'm sorry. And because I need to know what you're going to do. About what? About all of this. The articles. The questions. Are you pushing this? Are you feeding information to journalists? No. But you're not stopping it either. I can't stop something I didn't start. She searched my face. But you're waiting for it to finish. I didn't deny it. She stood slowly. I can't fix what I did. I know that. But I'm not going to make it worse by lying again. If they ask me direct questions, I'm going to tell them I'm not sure. That I can't verify everything I said before. That won't protect you. I know. But it might protect what's left of me. She left without waiting for a response. I sat alone for a few minutes after she was gone. Morrison appeared near the door. That looked tense. It was honest. Honest how? She's breaking ranks. Morrison nodded slowly. And the others? They'll notice. And when they do, they'll have to decide whether to pull her back in line or cut her loose completely. What do you think they'll choose? I stood and walked toward the exit. I think they'll choose wrong. The official notification arrived on a Tuesday. Not to me directly. To my lawyer. Who called immediately. There's been a development, she said. Her voice carried something I hadn't heard before. Not excitement exactly. Caution mixed with momentum. What kind of development? The state attorney's office has initiated a review of your case. Not an appeal. A review. Based on new information that's come to light through the nonprofit audit. I gripped the phone tighter. What information? Financial records that weren't available during the original trial. Transaction logs showing account access from IP addresses that don't match your location during the time period in question. And discrepancies in authorization signatures that couldn't have been made by you. How do they know they couldn't have been made by me? Because you were already in custody when several of them were processed. I was quiet. She continued. The audit also flagged documentation submitted during your trial as evidence. Forms that were supposedly signed by you, authorizing transfers. The firm conducting the audit brought in a forensic document examiner. Preliminary analysis suggests the signatures were replicated, not original. Forgery. They're not using that word yet. But yes. What happens now? The review board will examine the findings. They'll request additional documentation. Interview witnesses again. It's not a quick process. But it's a process. How long? 3 to 6 months. Maybe longer. I closed my eyes. And if they find enough to justify reversal, then the conviction gets vacated. The charges are dismissed or retried. Depends on whether the state wants to pursue a new case with what's left of their evidence. Which is nothing. Which is significantly less than they had the first time. After the call, I returned to my cell. Sierra was there, folding commissary items into neat stacks. Good news? She asked. Maybe. You don't look happy. I'm not unhappy. What are you then? I sat on my bunk. Stared at the wall. Careful. She stopped folding. Careful of what? Of expecting too much. Of assuming this means what it seems to mean. What else could it mean? It could mean they acknowledge errors without acknowledging responsibility. It could mean they correct the record without explaining how it got incorrect. It could mean I walk out of here and nothing actually changes except where I'm physically located. Sierra resumed folding. You've thought about this a lot. I've had time. The review took 4 months. During that time, I received no updates beyond what my lawyer provided in monthly calls. The process was opaque. Deliberate. I didn't know what questions were being asked or who was answering them. But information leaked anyway. Through Sierra's network. Through Morrison's observations. Through the occasional smuggled article. My husband had hired a criminal defense attorney. Not for representation in any formal proceeding. For consultation. Risk management. My friend had given a second interview to investigators. Afterward, she'd posted on social media about the importance of truth and accountability. The post was vague enough to mean anything. My sister-in-law had gone silent completely. Her last known location was her parents' house 2 states away. The nonprofit had settled with regulators, paid a fine, restructured their board, released a statement about strengthening internal controls. None of it mentioned me directly, but all of it created the architecture for what came next. The ruling was delivered on a Friday afternoon. My lawyer called at 3. "The conviction has been vacated," she said. I didn't respond immediately. "Mara? Did you hear me?" "Yes." The review board found sufficient irregularities in the evidence presented at trial to justify vacating the verdict. The state attorney's office has declined to pursue retrial. You're being released. When? Processing will take a few days. Probably Monday or Tuesday. What was the reason? Officially. She paused. Procedural deficiencies in evidence handling and authentication. Newly discovered documentation that contradicts material testimony provided during trial. Insufficient verification of financial records used to establish charges. They're not saying I was framed. No. They're saying the case didn't meet the standards required for conviction. That's not the same thing. No, it's not. I thanked her and ended the call. Morrison found me an hour later. Heard the news, she said. Word travels fast. It does when someone's being released after a wrongful conviction. It's not being called wrongful. It's being called procedurally deficient. Morrison smiled slightly. That's just how they protect themselves from liability. Everyone knows what it means. Do they? You're walking out. They're staying quiet. Yeah, people know. I nodded. She shifted her weight. How does it feel? I don't know yet. Most people would be celebrating. I'm not most people. No, you're not. She looked at me carefully. What are you going to do when you get out? I don't know that either. You're lying. I met her eyes. Maybe. She laughed quietly. Whatever you're planning, make sure it's worth it. Worth what? Whatever it costs you to do it. Release processing took 3 days. Forms. Interviews. Return of property I'd forgotten I owned. A manila envelope with my phone, wallet, and keys. Everything felt smaller than I remembered. They offered resources. Re-entry programs. Counseling services. Job placement assistance. I declined all of it. Monday morning, I walked through the same gate I'd entered 2 years earlier. No one was waiting this time. I'd made sure of that. A car was parked down the road. Hired service. I'd arranged it through my lawyer. The driver didn't ask questions. Didn't make conversation. Just drove. I watched the city materialize around me. Buildings I recognized. Streets that looked unchanged. Everything exactly where I'd left it. Except me. The apartment my lawyer had secured was small. Furnished minimally. It wasn't home. It was functional. I unpacked the envelope. Turned on my phone. It took several minutes to power up. When it did, notifications flooded in. Hundreds of messages from numbers I didn't recognize. News alerts. Social media mentions. I turned the phone off again. There was a laptop on the desk. Also arranged by my lawyer. I opened it. Started searching. Found articles about my release. Most were brief. Factual. The conviction had been vacated. I was free. The state had declined comment beyond the official statement. Some articles included reactions. Quotes from people who'd followed the case. Expressions of relief. Calls for accountability. None of the articles quoted my husband. Or my friend. Or my sister-in-law. They'd all gone quiet. I searched for the nonprofit. Found their updated website. New leadership. New mission statement. No mention of the scandal. I searched for my husband specifically. Found his social media accounts. All inactive since 3 months ago. I closed the laptop. Stood at the window. Looked out at the street below. People moved past. Living lives that had continued uninterrupted while mine had been suspended. I thought about Morrison's question. What I was going to do now. The system had corrected itself. acknowledged its error without naming who'd created it, released me without apology. I was free. But freedom wasn't the same as vindication. Vindication required acknowledgement, explanation, consequences for the people who'd engineered the narrative that took 2 years of my life. The system wasn't interested in providing that. So I'd have to find another way. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Carefully. The way I'd learned to do inside. I picked up my phone. Turned it back on. Scrolled through the notifications until I found what I was looking for. The journalist who'd written the second article. The one that hadn't been careful. I drafted a message. Brief. Professional. I'm willing to talk now. When and where? I sent it before I could reconsider. Then I sat down and waited. The journalist's name was Lauren Kemper. We met at a coffee shop 3 blocks from my apartment. She'd suggested somewhere public. Neutral. I'd agreed immediately. She was younger than I expected. Early 30s maybe. She arrived with a worn leather bag and a recorder she placed on the table between us without asking permission. "Thank you for reaching out," she said. I nodded. I wasn't sure you would. Most people in your position want to move on quietly. Most people weren't in my position. She smiled slightly. Fair. She clicked the recorder on. Do you mind? No. I'll ask some basic questions first. Background. Then we can get into specifics if you're comfortable. I waited. She started with simple things. Where I was staying. How the transition had been. Whether I'd reconnected with family. I answered briefly. Gave her nothing that wasn't already public. Then she shifted. The official statement from the state attorney's office was pretty vague, she said. Procedural deficiencies. Insufficient evidence verification. But it didn't specify what triggered the review. Can you clarify that? The nonprofit audit. Right. But how did the audit connect to your case specifically? Financial records. Transaction logs. Signatures that couldn't have been mine because I was already in custody when they were processed. She made notes. Did you know about these transactions while you were incarcerated? I suspected. But I didn't have access to documentation that could prove it. And your legal team didn't pursue this angle during trial or appeal? They tried. But without the audit, there was no way to compel the records. The accounts were controlled by my husband. He provided what he wanted to provide. Lauren looked up. So the audit created leverage. It created obligation. Someone had to verify the documentation. Once they did, the discrepancies became official. Did you push for the audit? No. But you knew it would create problems. I paused. I knew that if financial practices were questionable, scrutiny would reveal that. I didn't control when or how the scrutiny happened. She nodded slowly. Clicked her pen. Your husband has declined all interview requests. So has your friend who testified against you. Your sister-in-law couldn't be reached. Do you know why they've gone silent? You'd have to ask them. I'm asking you what you think. I think people stay quiet when talking creates more problems than staying quiet does. What problems would talking create for them? Inconsistencies. Contradictions with what they said under oath. Questions about coordination. Do you believe they coordinated? Yes. Can you prove it? The pattern proves itself. 3 separate people delivering aligned testimonies with matching details and synchronized adjustments when challenged. That doesn't happen accidentally. Lauren was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you want from this interview? I want the record to include my account. Not just the procedural correction. And what is your account? I looked directly at her. That I was deliberately removed. That the people closest to me engineered a narrative designed to transfer control while I couldn't object. That the system accepted their version because it was presented coherently and mine wasn't. Do you have evidence of this? I have their behavior. Their silence now. The fact that the moment scrutiny shifted toward them, unity collapsed. She wrote for several seconds. This will publish in 2 days. I'll send you a draft before it goes live. I don't need approval. Just accuracy. You trust me to be accurate? You've been accurate so far. She stopped the recording, packed the device into her bag. But she didn't stand. Off the record, she said. I nodded. I've covered a lot of wrongful convictions. Usually the system fights reversal hard. Defends the original verdict. This one folded fast. Why do you think that is? Because defending it would require defending the evidence. And the evidence couldn't withstand examination. But they could have fought anyway. Made you prove every detail. They didn't. No. They cut their losses. Which suggests someone decided it was cheaper to release me quietly than to expose how the conviction happened in the first place. She considered this. You think there's more. I think there's always more. She stood. Extended her hand. I shook it. Be careful, she said. Of what? People who've already proven they'll destroy you to protect themselves. They're still out there. And you're not protected anymore. After she left, I sat with the coffee I hadn't touched. Thought about what she'd said. Protection. Inside, I'd had structure. Rules. Limited exposure. No one could reach me directly. Every interaction was supervised. Outside, I was accessible again. Vulnerable. I left the coffee shop and walked without destination. Let the city reorient me. Notice changes. New construction. Closed businesses. The small ways places evolve when you're not watching. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered anyway. Mara. My husband's voice. I hadn't heard it in 2 years except through memory. I didn't respond. I know you spoke to a journalist, he said. I'm asking you not to pursue this further. Why would I do that? Because nothing good comes from dragging this out. You're free. The record is corrected. We can both move forward. We. Yes. There is no we. There hasn't been for 2 years. I understand you're angry. Do you? He was quiet briefly. I did what I thought was necessary. I'm not expecting you to forgive me. But continuing to push this publicly won't change what happened. It'll just make everything worse. For who? For everyone involved. Including you. Is that a threat? It's a reality. The more attention this gets, the more scrutiny falls on everyone. Including details you might not want examined. I stopped walking. What details? Nothing specific. Just complexity. Things that look different when people start searching for problems. You mean things you fabricated. I mean things that can be interpreted multiple ways depending on who's telling the story. I resumed walking. I'm not stopping. Mara, you took 2 years from me. You built a story that everyone believed because you made it believable. You coordinated. You rehearsed. You adjusted when challenged. And now that it's falling apart, you want me to protect you by staying quiet. I want us both to move on. Then you should have thought about that before you put me inside. I ended the call. Blocked the number. Kept walking. The article published 2 days later. The headline read, "Freed after wrongful conviction, woman speaks about coordinated betrayal." It was thorough. Detailed. It included my quotes alongside the timeline of events. The nonprofit audit. The financial discrepancies. The signatures that couldn't have been mine. It also included attempts to reach my husband, my friend, my sister-in-law. All had declined comment. The article ended with a question. How did 3 testimonies align so perfectly, and what motivated their coordination? Response was immediate. Social media picked it up. Other outlets requested follow-up interviews. People who'd followed the original trial resurfaced, re-examining what they'd believed. My lawyer called that evening. "You're getting attention," she said. I know. Some of it isn't friendly. There are people defending the original verdict. Saying you're rewriting history. Let them. Mara, I need to ask. What's your goal here? Accountability. For who? Everyone who participated. The system already corrected itself. You're free. Pushing further. The system corrected a procedural error. It didn't acknowledge who created the error. Or why. Or what they gained from it. And you think public pressure will force that acknowledgement? I think silence protects them. So I'm removing the silence. She sighed. Just be prepared for blowback. I am. But I wasn't. Not entirely. Because the next morning, I found something waiting outside my apartment door. An envelope. No postage. Hand-delivered. Inside, copies of documents I'd never seen. Bank statements. Transfer authorizations. All bearing signatures that looked like mine but weren't. And a note typed. And signed. You want the full story? Here it is. But be careful what you do with it. Some truths hurt everyone. I brought the envelope inside. spread the documents across the table, studied each one carefully. They were damning. Clear evidence of forgery, of financial manipulation, of systematic theft disguised as legitimate transactions. Everything I'd suspected, now documented. But the note was right. Publishing this wouldn't just hurt my husband. It would expose systems, institutions, people who'd looked the other way or failed to verify or accepted convenient narratives without scrutiny. It would implicate more than just the 3 who'd testified. I sat with that for a long time. Then I picked up my phone, called Lauren. "I have something for you," I said. The documents sat in Lauren's possession for 3 weeks before anything happened. She called periodically with updates, verification processes, attempts to confirm authenticity through independent experts, requests for comment sent to parties who continued refusing to respond. I waited, used the time to establish routines, found work through a temp agency, administrative tasks that required no explanation of the gap in my employment history. The work was forgettable. That made it useful. I moved through days with the same precision I developed inside. No wasted motion. No unnecessary engagement. People who recognized me from the articles occasionally approached, offered support, asked questions. I thanked them and extracted myself quickly. I wasn't interested in becoming a symbol. 23 days after I'd handed over the documents, Lauren called. "We're publishing tomorrow," she said. "All of it. Most of it. Legal reviewed everything. We're protected. But I need you to understand what happens next. Tell me. This will trigger investigations. Formal ones. Criminal potentially. Everyone connected to those transactions will be scrutinized, including the people who should have caught the irregularities in the first place." Good. It also means you'll be questioned. Repeatedly. Your role in the original financial arrangements. Whether you had knowledge of anything before your conviction. They'll look for ways to complicate your narrative. I expected that. And you're prepared for it? Yes. She was quiet briefly. Why are you doing this? You're already free. You could walk away. I could. But you're not. No. Why? I looked out the window. Watched traffic move below. Because walking away means accepting that what happened to me was just an unfortunate error. A procedural failure. Bad luck. It was more than that. I know. But unless someone says it clearly, that's how it gets remembered. As a system malfunction. Not as people making deliberate choices. And you need those choices named. I need them visible. The article published the next morning. The headline was direct. Documents reveal systematic financial fraud in case of wrongfully convicted woman. It included everything. The forged signatures. The unauthorized transfers. The timeline showing transactions processed while I was incarcerated. Expert analysis confirming the signatures weren't mine. It also included institutional failures. Banks that hadn't verified. Courts that hadn't questioned. Lawyers who hadn't pushed. And it included silence. The continued refusal of my husband, my friend, my sister-in-law to address any of it. Response was immediate and loud. Within hours, the state attorney's office announced an investigation. Not a review. An investigation. The nonprofit issued a statement expressing shock and cooperation with authorities. My husband's lawyer released a brief comment denying any wrongdoing and expressing confidence the truth would emerge. My friend posted on social media. A longer statement this time. She acknowledged being questioned during the original investigation. Said she'd answered truthfully based on what she knew at the time. Expressed sympathy for my situation. Stopped short of admitting anything specific. My sister-in-law remained silent. By evening, my phone was full of interview requests. News outlets. Podcasts. Documentary producers. I declined all of them. Lauren was the only person I spoke to, and only because she'd earned it. "You're being quiet," she observed during our call. "There's nothing else to say. The documents speak. People want to hear from you directly. Your reaction. Your feelings about vindication." I don't feel vindicated. Why not? Because vindication suggests the system worked. Eventually. That justice was served, just slowly. And you don't believe that? I believe the system corrected itself only when staying broken became too expensive. That's not justice. That's risk management. She made a sound that might have been agreement. What do you want then? I want people to understand how easily this happens. How coordination and confidence can override truth. How institutions prefer convenient narratives to complicated ones. How someone can be removed from their own life and have to fight just to be believed about their own experience. That's what the article says. Then the article is enough. The investigation moved faster than the original case had. Subpoenas were issued within days. Account records were seized. People were called to provide testimony under oath. My husband hired a different lawyer. Someone with a reputation for defending white-collar cases. My friend retained counsel too. My sister-in-law surfaced finally, through her own lawyer. Issued a statement saying she'd been coerced into testifying and was cooperating fully with investigators. I read the statement twice. Coerced was a careful word. It suggested victimhood without specifying perpetrator. It created distance without accepting responsibility. It also contradicted the unified front they'd maintained for 2 years. The fracture had become a break. Morrison sent a letter. Brief. Handwritten. Saw the news. Told you complications go both ways. Proud of you. M. I folded it carefully and kept it. 6 weeks after the article published, formal charges were filed. Fraud. Forgery. Perjury. My husband was named. My friend was named. My sister-in-law was listed as a cooperating witness. The news coverage was extensive. But I stopped following it closely. The mechanics no longer required my attention. I focused instead on reconstruction. Found an apartment with better light. Enrolled in a certification program for skills I'd wanted to develop before everything happened. Started running in the mornings. Small things. Deliberate things. People asked if I felt closure. I didn't know how to answer that. Closure suggested completion. An ending that resolved tension and provided emotional release. What I felt was different. I felt like I'd identified something broken, documented the break, and forced it into visibility. What happened next, the trials, the verdicts, the consequences, would unfold according to processes I couldn't control. I'd done what I needed to do. The rest belonged to systems that had failed me once and might fail me again. 3 months later, I was offered my old job back. Not the exact position. That had been filled. But something equivalent. Same company. Same level. Different department. The offer came through HR, professional. Careful. It acknowledged the circumstances of my departure without naming them directly. I considered it for 2 days. Then declined. Not out of anger. Not out of pride. Because going back meant pretending the gap hadn't changed me. That I could slip back into routines and relationships that had existed before. I couldn't. I'd learned too much about how quickly certainty could be manufactured. How easily I could be erased from my own story. How people I'd trusted could coordinate my removal without visible hesitation. Those lessons didn't fade just because the record had been corrected. Instead, I accepted a position at a different firm. Smaller. Less prestigious. But mine in a way the old job would never be again. On my first day, someone asked about the gap in my resume. I gave them the factual answer. Wrongful conviction. Since overturned. Charges against the people responsible still pending. They nodded. Didn't push further. I appreciated that. Months became a year. The trials proceeded slowly. Continuances. Motions. The usual mechanisms of delay. I didn't attend the hearings. Lauren kept me updated occasionally. Guilty pleas on some charges. Ongoing litigation on others. My sister-in-law's testimony being used to establish coordination. I listened without emotion. It was happening. That was enough. One evening, my phone rang. My mother. We hadn't spoken since the release. Our relationship had been strained long before the conviction. After, it had become something neither of us knew how to navigate. I saw the news, she said. About the plea deals. Yes. How are you feeling? I don't know. You must feel something. I thought about that. I feel like it's finished. Is it? The part 1 needed to finish. Yes. She was quiet. Then, I'm sorry I didn't believe you immediately. During the trial. I should have. You believed what seemed believable. Everyone did. That's not an excuse. No, but it's an explanation. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I said maybe. Someday. We ended the call with that indefinite possibility suspended between us. Some things remained unresolved. My relationship with my mother. The years I'd lost. The version of my life that would have existed if none of this had happened. I didn't pursue resolution on those things. Some absences couldn't be filled. Some time couldn't be recovered. I'd learned to carry that awareness without letting it consume me. The coat I'd left hanging by the door, the one that had been catalogued as evidence, was eventually returned to me along with other personal effects. I looked at it for a long time before deciding what to do with it. Then I donated it. It belonged to someone I used to be, and I wasn't her anymore.